How do you respond to somebody who's in pain, somebody who's grieving? Is there a right way to respond? Let's talk about it. Welcome. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thank you for joining me. Well, I don't have the answer because it's so individualized. And we will talk about this a little bit, but more specifically, I wanted to talk about something that I've heard recently, shared in a way that really kind of got me thinking. But this idea has been around for quite a long time. And so I really would like you to think about what feels best for you in a situation and share with us in the comments. But this idea is that we should not say, I'm sorry to people when they are grieving. That's kind of where it tends to come up the most, when they're grieving typically the loss of somebody that they love. But of course, grief means many different things. It can also be not saying you're sorry if something bad happens in their life. And I've heard some different reasoning behind this, but most recently, it was somebody who was sharing about how it's just wrong and it's not something we should ever do. And the reasoning in large part, really was because he said that when we say, I'm sorry, it puts the other person in a position of having to make us feel better or something along that line, making it clear that we've done nothing wrong to cause their pain, their heartache, whatever. And I thought about that, and you probably already have an idea where I stand on this. But my immediate reaction was, I don't think that has to be true at all. But he gave some examples of what you can say instead, and to avoid saying, I'm sorry. And as I listened to it, I thought, depending on the person, depending on their experiences, depending on where they are that day, the person could have a similar type of feeling. While it may not be specifically about the sorry part, it could be something else, like somebody is grieving and they're sharing with you, or maybe you just know that they're having a hard time and you ask how they are and they're not doing great, and you say, is there anything I can do? Well, that can be great, but I've heard other people say at times, when they're talking about what you should or shouldn't say to people, is when you ask somebody, is there anything I can do, then you're putting them in the position of having to tell you what they need or what they want you to do, and they don't want to have to do that. And I think that's a reasonable thing. And I tend to hear that from people who are going through a grieving process. And I share that in part just to kind of point out that there really isn't a right or wrong. There may be a right or wrong for one particular person, but trying to make that a generalized blanket way of approaching people or connecting with people is likely going to get us into trouble with somebody along the way. But what I really wanted to focus on here is that idea of I'm sorry. And one, to just kind of share in the comments, like, what does feel helpful to you? What feels supportive to you? So anybody who has worked with me or been in my groups or anything like that has heard me say, I'm sorry. And maybe it's, I'm sorry that you're hurting. I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry you're experiencing this. Any number of things that I am sorry for. And this is something I used to do as well. When people say, I'm sorry to us, we will often say, why are you sorry? You didn't do anything wrong. Or we're thinking that. And sometimes it can potentially feel maybe annoying. This person that I was listening to recently, he said that it's frustrating because they have to make sure that you know that you didn't do anything wrong, or that they don't blame you, or something along that line. So when somebody says, I'm sorry, whether you're sharing like your story or you're sharing that you're struggling, even if it's just somebody says, how are you doing? And you're saying, I'm having a hard day or whatever. And the person says, I'm sorry. How does that feel to you? Now, of course, who the person is, how they say it, what your experience with them is, like there's different things that can go into that, but just kind of generally the idea of somebody saying, I'm sorry, how does that feel? And if you don't like it, please be honest. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Is there something that you prefer? And I really do think this is helpful for all of us to kind of have an understanding of the variety of things that can affect people, even when we're meaning well, that can have a negative impact on people, and things that might have a positive impact on people. And if you see somebody else sharing in the comments that they don't like I'm sorry and they like this, but you don't like that, like being able to share that in the comments as well, just to really help emphasize the reality that we are all different. And again, depending on the specific circumstance, it can make a big difference on how you're doing that day, on how it feels to you. But I think the biggest issue that I took with this, or from this really, more so not of this, but for this, is that the problem I don't think so much is around somebody saying, I'm sorry, which then makes somebody feel like they have to let them know it's not their fault. I actually think the underlying issue with that dynamic, where people can feel even just uncomfortable with somebody expressing their sorrow for what you're going through. The problem, I think, actually is, obviously my opinion, my perspective, is that we don't know how, and it feels uncomfortable to hold other people's, to be in the presence of other people's difficult feelings. And I think for most of us, for sure, if we say, I'm so sorry that happened, or I'm sorry you're going through this, or whatever, I think for most of us, and this isn't to make it right, I'm just expressing from my personal standpoint, but also what I've heard other people share, that it's an expression of the sorrow that we may feel individually for the pain that that person is going through. So in a sense, a lot like empathy, right? Because empathy is feeling to a degree, understanding, even if you can't fully understand it, but having this sense and this awareness that this person that you care about to some degree, that this person that matters to you is feeling bad, they're hurting, they're experiencing something difficult and stressful. The sorry is coming from feeling the wish that this person wasn't experiencing that, from the sadness that comes from the person that matters to you going through something that you know is painful to them, because you don't want them to feel that. And when somebody, and this isn't to blame anybody because we're actually taught kind of the opposite, but as individuals in most societies, male and female, we are not taught that difficult feelings are okay, that difficult feelings are not something that we need to run from, that being with other people in their difficult feelings is actually one of the most beautiful human aspects of connection that we can experience. one of the most profound that we can experience. But because we are uncomfortable sitting with our own discomfort, and certainly sitting with others because we want to fix it, right? We don't want people to feel bad. We don't want them to feel sorry for us. And one of the things I hear so often from survivors is, I don't want anybody to pity me. Have you thought that? Have you said that? And when somebody says, I'm sorry, that can feel like pity. And that word itself, there's a whole lot around that I could do a whole other video on. But that is something that a lot of people really struggle with, even people that aren't survivors, but the idea that somebody would pity them. And so when we hear somebody say to us, I'm sorry, it can cause us to feel like we need to fix it, that we need to make sure they're okay. We may feel that they are pitying us and therefore might feel frustrated or aggravated or think that they're making it all about them or something along that line. But the problem, I don't think, really is with I'm sorry. The problem is a society of people that believes that we need to fix it and that being in discomfort is something to avoid at all costs. And that, I think, is the primary issue, and it's the underlying issue with the idea that I'm sorry is not okay. But how do we get there? How do we learn to accept, to be with difficult emotions? How do we allow ourselves to take in somebody's care and concern? Because that is a big part of the issue for a lot of people as well, is just a real struggle with being able to feel the compassion, the love, the support, the empathy from others. And when we feel that discomfort, when it doesn't feel quite right, we tend to push. And when we push, that can be literally we move away from them and we don't interact. It could mean being reactionary toward that. It could be saying something to yourself about how they make it all about them. It could be a variety of things. But when we go to that place, we're not allowing the care, the concern, the love, the support in. So it really becomes this dynamic that there's a part of us that wants the support, that wants to feel, whether energetically or in real life, the embrace of that care and concern. Yet we're uncomfortable with other people's emotions around it, or the expression of other people's care and concern for us. So, first recognizing that if somebody says, I'm sorry, when we are going through something difficult, maybe learning to be able to not read too much into it. Now, of course, there are going to be some exceptions. There might be somebody in your life for which the I'm sorry means absolutely nothing. That certainly happens. It can be just a quick response to move on and get away from the uncomfortable feelings because they don't want to deal with it. It could be that you have this long history with this person who has never really shown up for you. And so I'm not talking about those types of circumstances. Now, there's work that can be done around that, but I'm talking about more generally people that you feel relatively comfortable and safe with, that you've had experience with, or maybe even kind of somebody that you don't know that well, but you have no reason to think that they have some underlying sort of motive or something like that. But when somebody says, I'm sorry, particularly if they're addressing specifically any sort of pain or you share something difficult with them, and this doesn't have to be just for I'm sorry. It could be for any sort of response, I guess, generally speaking. But maybe practicing, and it took me a long time to do this, and it's still probably a practice depending on the circumstance. First, practicing allowing that expression of empathy in, allowing our hearts to just open a little to feeling, to acknowledging within ourselves first the empathy, the support, the care, the concern from this person. Allowing ourselves to open to that, because that sometimes can be the hardest thing. Because when you've been very self-protective of your heart in particular, not wanting to be hurt or let down, allowing yourself to be open in those times that are feeling very vulnerable is really challenging. But the only way we can begin to feel safe enough to open our heart is by practicing moments of letting little bits and pieces of that in. So practicing allowing that in, and then being able to recognize any sort of discomfort that you have and what it is that it's creating for you. So is it creating for you a need to make that person feel okay? Is it creating for you somebody making it about them? Is it creating this shame that comes up when we think that people pity us? Like there could be a number of different things that are happening, but recognizing what is happening in this moment and recognizing I can sit with this. It may not feel comfortable. You may not want to. You may not like it, but recognizing you'll be okay, that you can sit with this discomfort, recognize that you don't have to act on that discomfort, whether it's shame or feeling the need to fix it or resolve it. That you can be safe, even when the feeling doesn't feel safe. You can be safe in that discomfort. Also, potentially practicing saying or responding in a way that acknowledges whatever that might look like. So maybe it's not even necessarily speaking specifically. There could be some other sort of nonverbal things that happen, but basically taking it in and acknowledging that you've heard, you've listened, and you've taken it in. So, for example, you might say, "Thank you, I appreciate that," or just "Thank you." You could say, I'm drawing a blank right now, but you could say something that is very short. It doesn't have to directly be about them specifically saying I'm sorry. But in regards to something nonverbal, so if somebody were to say I'm sorry, and maybe they are like they have their arm on your shoulder, or maybe they're giving you a hug or something, and they say I'm sorry, you don't have to say anything in those moments because your nonverbal can say a lot. And so maybe you just hug a little harder, or maybe you squeeze their hand a little harder. And this is something that actually can be practiced outside of those particular types of circumstances, right? Like if somebody pays you a compliment, you can practice saying thank you instead of getting in your head about all the reasons why they might not mean it, or why they shouldn't mean it, or they wouldn't mean it if they only knew this or that, right? It's about trying to stay present, open to what is being expressed. And I do want to be clear again that if you are somebody who doesn't like somebody to say I'm sorry, that's okay. That is perfectly okay. And I think that this conversation can be a good opportunity to recognize, what do I like and what don't I like? What would feel good to me in those moments? And then being able to practice, and this is definitely a practice, expressing that to somebody. So like if you have like a close friend, for example, and you're grieving, and maybe it's not the loss of somebody recently, but maybe you're going through a grieving process related to trauma healing, or it's the anniversary of somebody's death and it's coming up again. You can practice when you have a conversation with this friend, or maybe you specifically reach out to this friend, and you might say, I'm kind of having a really hard time with this, and I just need to know that I'm not alone, or I need to know it's going to be okay. So you might have an idea of what it is that you want or need, but it really is a practice to get there. The reality is most of us don't really know what we want or need, particularly need. But that is part of the practice, and that can end up going a long way. You know, if somebody says, I'm sorry, and that's not quite what you're hoping from them, maybe being able to ask for a hug, or asking to get together for, I don't know, lunch, or just get together to go for a walk or something like that. But the more comfortable that we become with our uncomfortable feelings, the more comfortable we become with other people's expression of feelings as well, whether it's their own or expressing it towards us. But also, as significantly, if not more so, we begin to understand what we do want, what we do need in different types of circumstances. And the more we're able to express that in whatever way we're doing that, the less impact those times when somebody might say something that isn't hitting right where you want it to, you're not going to be negatively impacted by that, because you have enough of these more meaningful sorts of experiences to hold on to. And that's true. It doesn't have to be the same person. It can be different people. So I really would love to hear from you again, if you haven't shared yet. Just what does this feel like to you? For many of you, grief may be something that you've had a very real experience with, in terms of people saying things or responding to you. But certainly for most people watching this, sharing different pieces of your story, or different ways that you've felt about things in your life. What does it mean to you? And does this conversation help you think about it in a way that maybe you hadn't before? And not specifically the I'm sorry part, because again, for some people that might work, for some people it doesn't. I will say, if you've ever heard me say I'm sorry and it didn't sit well, I was gonna have to say I'm sorry. Please know that my intention was an expression of empathy, because I know how difficult all the emotions around anything related to trauma and healing can be. And I don't want anybody to have to feel that ever. But if whatever you do, whether you like it, whether you don't like it, have you ever even thought about it? Have you ever noticed your own reactions when somebody says, I'm sorry? Like I said, for me, if anybody ever said that to me, even if they are apologizing for something like they did, that they probably should be apologizing for, I had a hard time with that. And certainly any sort of I'm sorry related to connecting with my emotions, it didn't feel comfortable to me. It's not that I didn't like it specifically. It's not that I thought anything bad, but it just felt uncomfortable, because it felt very similar to praise. It felt similar to compliments and somebody expressing like positive thoughts or feelings about me. And I know a lot of you can relate to that as well. But I will say that I do experience it differently now. than I did before. And that comes from healing, because I think mostly, and this is why I'm doing this video, because with healing, I can be in that discomfort and I don't feel the need to fix it. And maybe there are times that people are saying it because they feel responsible or something. But I know for me, if I know that they're not responsible, I don't feel the need to have to make sure that they know that they're not responsible. Aside from, like, if I'm upset about something and my husband thinks that maybe he did something and it has nothing to do with him, I will let him know that it's not him, because I don't want him thinking that it has anything to do with him. So share what came up for you in the comments. Let me know your preference, or does it feel like it matters at all? And do you tend to respond to other people in the way that you want to be responded to? Do you tend to say, I'm sorry? And if so, what's happening within you that's causing you to express your empathy, your sorrow, whatever it might be, your support? What do you say? Let me know. Thanks so much for being here. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.